Thank you everybody for attending today. This is our first Global Chamber Detroit event, so really appreciate the folks here in the room, and then of course everyone around the world for attending, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. And our first speaker, actually, it is very much evening in Guangzhou. Kevin Zhao is going to kick off today's discussion about the Canton Fair, the 124th Canton Fair, coming up in October. He's Director of VIP development and works with executives who are coming in and out of the Canton Fair. So he's going to give us a very special presentation around what's happening with the Canton Fair this year, and then he's going to share a video as well. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, hi. Hi, can you hear me? Good morning, everyone.
Good evening, good morning.
Yeah, I should say good morning to you. Dear distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a pleasure to meet you here and hold the Canton Fair Promotion Conference in Detroit. I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the great support of Global Chamber and a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for your support to the Canton Fair. China Import and Export Fair, also known as Canton Fair, is established in 1957, co-hosted by the Ministry of Commerce of People's Republic of China and the People's Government of Guangdong Province, and organized by China Foreign Trade Center. It is held every spring and fall in Guangzhou. Canton Fair has been driving trade cooperation between China and the rest of the world ever since its first session. Till present, it has established trade ties with 214 countries and regions in the world, playing a critical role for China to become a big trading nation. This May, the buyer attendance of last session of Canton Fair totaled more than 200,000 from 214 countries and regions, with more than 10,000 coming from the US. Now, Canton Fair is a must-attend event for importing Chinese products, exporting to the Chinese market, or selling your products to the world. It is an open stage for international trade, one that allows you to sell to and buy from the globe. The 124th session of Canton Fair will be held in Guangzhou from October 5th to November 4th. As China's #1 fair, we provide a wide range of Chinese products with good quality at competitive price. Vehicle and spare parts is one of our important sections, where you can find a large number of reliable factories and suppliers. Our complex is one of the world's largest, but because we have such a wide range of products to exhibit, we have to divide the fair into 3 phases. Each phase lasting for 5 days. The total exhibition space is 1.185 million square meters, the largest in the world. There are 10 exhibition sections with a space of 50,000 square meters and above, and 5 sections 100,000 square meters and above. So please refer to the brochure to find out the product that you are interested in each phase. Today, I would also like to share another very important news with you, that China International Import Expo will be held in Shanghai from November 5th to November 10th this year. We also sincerely invite all of you to visit and participate in the expo. Finally, thank you very much for coming today, and we look forward to welcoming you at the fair.
Thank you very much, Kevin. This is Doug in Troy, Michigan. And we do have a couple questions that we had arranged prior, and also based on your conversation, you also brought up the Shanghai Fair. We were actually talking earlier about the openness. My understanding was that it's closed for distributors or for like to have a table, but you can actually go and visit the fair. Could you give us an update on that, please?
You were talking about the China International Import Expo?
In Shanghai, exactly, in the first part of November.
Yes, because that is the Chinese government's action for opening up. They want to attract many foreign companies to exhibit at the expo. So we welcome the foreign companies as a exhibitor in the expo, and of course the visitors can be from domestic and also from the foreign countries.
Okay.
But at this moment, because it will be held in November, so I think all the booths are all set out.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. In terms of the Canton Fair, tell us the specific dates for the fair, and then are there distributor tables still available? Tell us a little bit more about the availability for U.S. and other companies.
The date of the Canton Fair starts from October the 15th. And because the Canton Fair is called China Import and Export Fair, but actually Canton Fair focuses more on the export of Chinese products. So 99% of those companies are from Chinese companies. And we only have one hall for international pavilions. So in the international pavilions, we have those companies from foreign countries. And at the moment, we only have a couple of companies from the U.S. But we are looking forward to having more U.S. companies to exhibit in our international pavilion.
Okay, that sounds good. And we're going to be hearing from a Michigan company here in a few minutes. I think you also have maybe a video that you'd like to show?
Yes, I think Cesar is responsible for playing the video.
Okay. We'll queue that up, and then for Q&A as we go forward, we'll, if you have questions here or anyone online, if you have questions, please send them in through the bottom font there, the chat area, please.
Sure. Thank you very much.
When the spring rain wets the earth and the autumn sun warms the 5 continents, something big happens in China. In every spring and autumn, more than 200,000 buyers from all over the world gather at the China Import and Export Fair, or Canton Fair, the most reputable trade fair in China, to start a fascinating journey to friendship and trade.
广交会是中国政府1957年创办的，50多年来，始终保持着旺盛的生命力和蓬勃的发展势头，成为中国历史最久、规模最大、声誉最佳的国际著名展会。广交会是中国对外开放的窗口，是中国对外开放的缩影，是中国对外开放的标志。
Canton Fair, jointly hosted by the Ministry of Commerce and the People's Government of Guangdong Province, and organized by the China Foreign Trade Center, is held twice a year in spring and autumn in Guangzhou, China. Canton Fair has a total exhibition area of 1.18 million square meters and over 60,000 stands. It takes the lead among the world's yearly exhibitions in terms of scale. For over half a century, Canton Fair has never been stopped, even in the turbulent 1960s, or during the SARS epidemic that frightened the world, or during the global financial crisis. Canton Fair plays a significant role in expanding China's opening up and promoting China's foreign trade development. Through Canton Fair, China has strengthened bilateral economic and trade communications with over 210 countries and regions in the world. Since China joined the WTO, Canton Fair has shown even more vigorous vitality and stronger development momentum, promoting gradual transformation and upgrading China's foreign trade.
Ich bin Feli Schmidt und komme aus Deutschland. Hier findet man immer eine Überraschung. Als ich vor einigen Jahren zum ersten Mal hierher kam, war ich sofort von dieser Messe fasziniert.
The magnificent Canton Fair complex is a modern, smart, user-friendly, and ecological architectural complex with advanced facilities and complete functions. It is equally famous as the world-class exhibition centers in Hanover and Frankfurt of Germany and Milan of Italy. The Spring Canton Fair is held from April 15th to May 5th, and the Autumn Fair is held from October 15th to November 4th, each divided into 3 phases. Phase 1 of Canton Fair mainly shows electromechanical, lighting, hardware, and building material products. Phase 2 mainly shows light industrial crafts, gifts, and home decorations. Phase 3 mainly shows textiles, garments, food, livestock, medicines, and healthcare products. Canton Fair gathers more than 24,000 excellent exhibitors from all over the world and displays more than 150,000 varieties of products. Every session, a great number of new products appear at Canton Fair, and priority is given to high-tech and low-carbon environmentally friendly products, making Canton Fair a trendsetter in the world. Canton Fair gathers the best buyers from all over the world. In recent years, Canton Fair has been making greater efforts to invite buyers from emerging markets, especially from countries along the One Belt and One Road. As a result, there has been a steady increase in the number of buyers from Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Nearly 100 companies among the world's top 250 retailers, released in 2014, have attended Canton Fair. The top 10 retailers, including Walmart, Carrefour, and Tesco, have all set up purchasing offices at the multinational sourcing service. Canton Fair has a brand exhibition area, which encourages and helps companies and products with proprietary brands, high technical content, and high added value to take part in the exhibition. In the official website of the 118th Canton Fair, a brand window section is introduced to provide global buyers with information on the brand enterprises and their quality products at Canton Fair. Buyers can have a glance at the first-rate products in China here. In 2014, in order to meet international market demand, the exhibition section configuration was optimized by adding 3 new themes, i.e. outdoor spa equipment, new energy, and pet products. A layout consisting of 16 major product categories and 50 exhibition sections is formed.
Auf jeder Messe kann ich viele neue Produkte finden, jedes Mal neue Entdeckungen machen. Es ist wirklich ein wunderbarer Ort.
In order to further promote balance of import and export trade and to increase imports, the International Pavilion was set up at Canton Fair in 2007, which provides opportunities for overseas enterprises to explore the Chinese market and for domestic enterprises to purchase overseas products. Currently, the International Pavilion consists of 6 specialized themes, which are in Phase 1 and Phase 3, with an exhibition area of 20,000 square meters. More than 8,000 high-quality overseas enterprises from over 100 countries and regions have successfully entered the Chinese market to achieve mutual benefits, win-win results, and common development together with Chinese enterprises. Canton Fair has always paid great attention to product quality and safety, and all exhibitors must undergo qualification assessment and strict selection. 80% of exhibitors should have their export volume reaching a set standard, and 5% of exhibitors shall be different every year. Canton Fair encourages low-carbon, environmentally friendly, and energy-saving products to take part in the fair, and works closely with quality supervision authorities in various regions on quality supervision. Canton Fair is devoted to maintaining its reputation and brand image of Made in China and China's #1 fair. Canton Fair is a role model among Chinese trade fairs in terms of intellectual property protection. Canton Fair has offices for handling disputes and complaints with respect to intellectual property, product quality and safety, and trading, so as to provide customers with information and arbitration to handle trade disputes and complaints in a timely manner and build a fair and just trading environment. To encourage innovation, Canton Fair has established the Product Design and Trade Promotion Center, which invites overseas designers, color strategy experts, and authoritative specialists in trend analysis to interact with exhibitors, thereby effectively broadening the international design vision of domestic export enterprises and advancing the independent innovation process. Up to the 117th Canton Fair, a total of 522 design companies from 15 countries and regions, including France, Greece, Italy, and the Netherlands, have participated in PDC activities. The cumulative total of the net design display area is 7,273 square meters, and a total of 257 theme activities have been held. China Foreign Trade Center, the organizer of Canton Fair, provides buyers and exhibitors with thoughtful services at any time. It strives to build a smart Canton Fair from various perspectives, such as buyer invitation, exhibition organization, e-commerce, and on-site services. In 2014, the Canton Fair community was built on Facebook, the international social media platform, with hundreds of thousands of fans. The Internet promotion campaign has been realized globally. Cross-industry cooperation has been carried out with China Southern Airlines, Emirates Airlines, and international hotel groups. Various activities, such as advertisement reward for new buyers, media resource exchange program, and iShare, have been carried out to effectively improve the promotion efficiency. Online system for operation of the International Pavilion and evaluation system for brand section have been developed. The official website of Canton Fair has been optimized and adjusted to deliver the latest Canton Fair information to buyers through multiple channels. The online leasing function of Easy Exhibitor platform has also been further improved, with 11 newly added convenient online services. The online leasing function has also been launched in the WeChat account, and the location navigation interaction service has been introduced. Various banks are ready to provide customers with convenient financial services. Inside the exhibition venue, there are restaurants offering all kinds of cuisine from all over the world.
Auf der Messe findet man überall Freunde, Trendinformationen und vielfältige Geschäftschancen. Vielleicht liegt gerade darin die Anziehungskraft dieser Messe. Man kommt mit Erwartungen und fährt mit Geschäftserfolg nach Hause.
Canton Fair allows customers to work and rest in a quiet, tree-lined environment. The Westin Pajot is a five-star hotel in the Canton Fair complex. The aerial gallery bridge in the hotel provides access to areas A, B, and C of the Canton Fair complex, and the rooms offer a nice view of the beautiful Pearl River and Guangzhou.
Auf der Messe kann man mit den bedeutendsten chinesischen Außenhandelsunternehmen Kontakt aufnehmen und Produkte von bester Qualität kaufen. Wenn Sie nach Hause fahren, bringen Sie nicht nur Bestellungen heim, sondern auch wertvolle Freundschaften.
Li Huan has never been absent from Canton Fair since its establishment and is a witness to its birth and growth.
每一届都不漏的话，我就只能我走得动。
When you ask to a French guy or a Spanish buyer or anyone in Europe, you know, what is the after the Canton Fair, what is the second fair in the world? Nobody knows. It's not only that it's the biggest fair; it's the only large big fair, and this is very good that that we don't have to do 20 fairs, because 20 fairs every 6 months is very difficult to attend. One big one is much more convenient for us, and I think that is the success of that.
Not only sourcing from China, but for the last few years also foreign companies looking to sell their goods to China as well.
If one day I stop the business, I still will come to China. But combined with the business, I have been attracted of all the other things, you know, the culture, the history, the food, the people.
广交会创办以来，在世界人民心中是友谊的纽带、贸易的桥梁。我们欢迎世界各地的朋友来广交会做客。
There's a round of applause here, Kevin. Could you contrast the value for Canton Fair for retailers, with products in retail versus B2B? Because one of the things and the reasons why we put this event together was the Detroit area has a lot of automotive and electronic component suppliers. How is the value of the Canton Fair for them relative to some of the things that we saw on the tape, which seem to be more retail oriented?
Yes, I understand some of the Detroit companies, they want to open the Chinese market, sell to the electronics. As you can see from the brochure, we have International Pavilion, and the phase 1 from October 15th to 19th is about electronics and household electrical appliance, building materials and hardware, machinery and equipment. I think some of those products are really, it is Detroit, a strong industry. As Chinese, their living standards running up. So some of us really wants to buy those products. We think that the products in the U.S. Is with better quality. So I think we do have a very huge market in China, and also because as the rising living standard of Chinese people, we have a growing, we have an increasing number of the middle class and also the higher class. So they are willing to spend more money on their household appliances and also the electronics, such as Apple's iPhone is a very good example. So I would say there is a huge market for those industries in Detroit.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, in terms of the next steps, anybody certainly on the recording, either live or being recorded, that's interested in more information, you can send information or your questions to info@globalchamber.org, and we'll get your questions into Kevin. Kevin, I presume you're going to be there in terms of companies that are coming in. You're going to give them the VIP treatment, and that's a lot of what you end up doing. We have brochures and information we can also share with anybody that's online and here in the room. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about the fair before we move on to our next speaker?
Yeah, and because at the moment there is a heated discussion is that China and the U.S. is on a trade war. Actually, this is not what we want, not what the Chinese companies and the U.S. companies want. So I would say the Canton Fair is a really good place to increase the relations between China and the U.S. So I think the Canton Fair is a very good opportunity for the businessmen both from America and China. So please visit our Canton Fair. I think you will find what you're looking for here.
Very good. We know it's very late there in China. I think your next meeting is the bed and going to sleep. One of the things that we do here at Global Chamber is, we're in 525 cities around the world, and it doesn't stop. It's 24/7. So thank you for making your day a 24/7 day, and thank you for sharing, Kevin. And we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can send to my email. I think Global Chamber has my email.
Thank you very much. I think what you said, we have your information, so if anybody here or online would like to be in connection with Kevin about their specific company and their situation, we'll be happy to connect you. So our next speaker is now, we come back all the way onto this side of the world, and it's in a place called Taylor, Michigan. And so this is a successful company here from Michigan, and Robert, who's our speaker, has been there for over 20 years and has seen the evolution of the Canton Fair. Robert, are you online, and could you now speak a little bit about your experience? I see your name, but I don't hear you. So if it's, Robert, are you there? If not, we'll switch over until we get that fixed. Okay, so we're not hearing you, Robert, if you're speaking, and so Cesar, cue us in on that. I'd love to hear from Robert. He's here in Michigan, just down the road, down 75, I believe. And so we're going to switch now to our next speaker, which, let's see, I think it's Todd. So Todd Cornell he's actually a Global Chamber member in Denver, and he's come into Michigan. He's got a Michigan ties. He's been to Canton Fair many times, and so he's going to be talking about what's it like to be part of the Canton Fair, particularly if you're a European or an American company or non-Chinese company, what is it like to go there and what can you expect? So Todd, thanks for coming in today and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Doug. So I'm happy to be here today to be able to share about the Canton Fair and also some things to consider in being successful in China. What I bring to the table is the aspect of culture a lot, and that's an important aspect of being successful in China, is understanding the culture. I spent over 20 years in China and worked for several foreign companies and was also involved in sourcing some products and whatnot. And so I just wanted to share some of my own insights. And a lot of it has to do with culture and understanding the culture, because there's a big difference between East and West. And sometimes we don't take the time to learn about the other side. So I'd like to share a little bit about my experience and insights. Next slide, please. So we have the Canton Fair that we just learned about. And what we just saw is an amazing rendition of the Canton Fair. We got a lot of information, but now what we need to consider is everything that's going on underneath everything that we saw. So the next slide, please. So some of the different options, I've put together two options for going to the Canton Fair and being able to get involved with it. And one would be having somebody from your company go to the Canton Fair. One thing that is important is that you have somebody who's able to bridge the cultural linguistic gaps between America and China, or your country and China. You could have dedicated support. That dedicated support would be somebody who's working for you, that you have hired, that you know understands you and also understands the Chinese culture and is able to interact and communicate clearly with them and communicate back clearly to you what's actually being said. Or you can find somebody at the Canton Fair, or it would probably be more that they will find you. And in those situations, number one, you have to be concerned with their ability to actually understand your cultural perspectives, your language, and your needs. And also, who are they actually working for? Are they working for you, even though you're paying them, or are they actually working for the Chinese manufacturer, where they probably are also getting paid by them? So there is that need to understand the way the Chinese culture interacts within its own culture. So visiting manufacturer or a rep's booth versus communication through email and pictures. So you can interact with them very directly if you go to the Canton Fair. You can be interacting with them. You can see what they have to offer. You can get to know them a little bit. But when it's being done through email and through pictures, it's a little bit more difficult to qualify and understand the quality issues. So what's your mode of qualification? One thing is that you don't want to depend on the Canton Fair to be that qualification. Just because they're at the Canton Fair does not necessarily mean that they are quality, that they are going to be easy to work with, and that they are actually working with you in a way that is in your best interest or that's in the interest of both parties. The Canton Fair brings in a lot of high quality, but they also have other issues that could very easily be taken advantage of. That is this a trade company or is it actually a manufacturer? And so it's important that we're dealing with the manufacturer and not with a trade company. And a lot of things that happen when we don't go over there is that we don't know. Because it's very easy to create middleman interactions in China. You can have somebody who knows somebody in the factory, you can have somebody who is related to the person who owns the factory, and they become a middleman. And so it's important to go to the factory. And so that takes us to the point where it's important to visit factories. We need to, when we're in Canton, we need to take time to go and visit the factories. The Canton Fair is an opportunity to get to know the manufacturer, to get to know their basic interaction style, their basic prices, but then it's important to arrange a trip to visit the factory, to interact with the more upper echelon management people in the factory. You may be interacting with somebody who's more of a salesperson at the Canton Fair. You want to be able to interact with somebody on a higher position in the factory. So you go to the source, then you want to take a tour of the factory. You want to understand the factory, get to see how they're working, talk with the higher management people. It's important to be able to get into making those relationships, have a meal with them. That's very important in China, is to get together, have a meal, get to know them, take some time to talk about family things. It's a relationship. This will, in the long run, establishing a good relationship will help you in the long run with the factories and the manufacturers that you work with. Discuss what you're looking for, what your interests are, the different things that you're looking to develop, and understand what they can offer you and how you can work together. Okay, the next slide, please, Cesar. So that was the best option. This would be the second option, is to hire somebody that you trust to go over and actually be your rep. They're working and acting in your interest as your rep. You agree with what it is with them. You put together a list of products that you're interested in sourcing. They go over, they interact with these factories. They do the same thing, essentially. They visit the booths, they get product pricing, pictures, whatnot, and then they also go through and do that qualification for you. They visit the factories, they communicate with you about what the factory is like. They can see the factory, they can understand what's going on in the factory, taking pictures. They're again having a meal, getting to know them and establishing that base relationship so that you can move forward and have a more successful interaction. Next slide, please. So some business tips for China. So what we have here is we have one gentleman who's trying to understand what the representative for the factory is talking about, and he's saying, I wish I could understand Chinese. And then we have a Chinese woman sitting behind him listening to the conversation and asking herself, is he really using that word correctly? Because there's so many aspects of how the languages are interacting. Are we hearing what we're needing to hear? Are we hearing what they're saying? Do we know that what we're saying is being interpreted or shared correctly? Okay, next slide, please, Cesar. So we all know about the art of war. Know your opponent and know yourself. That's one of the most important aspects of Chinese culture, and the Chinese are very good at doing this. They understand themselves, and they also take time to learn about the people that they're interacting with. And when we do that, we're actually strengthening ourselves. So when we have people who are able to help us to do those cross-cultural interactions from the position of understanding both sides, that person is able to help you be successful. So in a lot of ways, it's just like football. We need to huddle and we need to discuss the opposition. And that's not to say that we're at war with somebody, but we have to recognize that we're interacting with a culture that is very different than our own. That's something that can be in our favor, and it can also work against us. So relationships in China are more valuable than gold. That's in business and in anything. It's just simply that is the base. And there's an expression in Chinese, 惜墨如金, which actually represents the idea of how important it is to have a good type of ink for doing calligraphy and doing artwork. But that also is used more, that expression is used more to talk about how important it is to have good relations with people. We want to maintain the relations and save the relations because they can always come back to help us. So when we're dealing with people and we're talking about pricing, pricing that comes easy is always negotiable. If it's coming too easily, then that means that we need to talk to them to possibly negotiate a better price. So pricing is something that in China is always very flexible. There's areas that we can work through getting better pricing, dealing with lowering prices or increasing quality. Chinese language agreements versus English language agreements in China, it's always Chinese. So don't ever feel that if you have an agreement and you're reading the English version, that that is going to be the legal version. It's not. It's the Chinese version. So you need somebody who understands that Chinese version, which can bring around a very different interpretation than the English version simply through the cultural understanding. So China has supposedly 5,000 years. You could say 7,000, but now what's being said mostly is 4,000. 4,000 years of history, and that's based on the fact that there's writings that date back to those periods. So the Chinese view time much differently than we do. Sometimes we feel like they're taking a long time to do things, but that's just the culture. It may seem like it's a longer period of time because they have been around for a longer period of time. So that kind of gives them the ability to recognize that things can be done over a longer period of time, but that's always something that can be worked through. One thing that's important is to ask more questions than you answer. Don't be an open book. Tell them what they need to know. If they ask more questions, just tell them what they need to know. But at the same time, you want to understand more about them. Ask more questions about the factory, what they can offer, what they do, different aspects. But when they're asking you things, it's also important to recognize that just share what needs to be shared and keep the rest to yourself. So it's important to get support from people who are coming from your own cultural background. They understand you, they understand your ideals and your values. And then when going over, it's important that they also understand what's going on that side so that they can easily help you to work back and forth between things and not get caught into some difficult situations, but to do things in a successful way. Next slide, please. So, as I've said a few times already, it's important to work with people who understand both cultures equally, that they have a good impression and a good understanding of both cultures, they're able to communicate clearly, and they understand the nuances of what's going on. So language is very important. Chinese sometimes doesn't translate into English through a dictionary. It's more of a sense of understanding the language, sense of understanding the meaning and how it's used. So there's things that don't translate, and that's where we require a dual mindset. So we have an expression, bai ma fei ma, a white horse is not a horse. That makes sense in Chinese. You can actually argue that a white horse is not a horse. However, for us, it doesn't make sense. Then there's also an expression in China that you hear a lot, 以后再说, which means we'll talk about it later. But what it really means is I don't really want to talk about it later. So how are things like that expressed? How do we work through that? That's where it's so important to have people who understand these things to help you. The philosophies that Chinese culture is based on is Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Those three philosophies work really well together, but they're very different from our philosophies and from our cultural understandings. So we need to be able to understand those in order to be successful when interacting with cultures that's the base of their philosophy. So the ideals, the values, and the business practices are very different. So concepts of right, wrong, trust, and friendship are also very different, and how those things interact within the culture. And so it's important to have an understanding of that, or to have somebody who's able to help you to maneuver these cross-cultural situations. Thank you. 谢谢.
Are there questions or comments? Did you get it right?
So Todd, what are you doing now? What is Culture 668 all about?
Okay, so the question is, just make sure that the audience gets, what's Culture 668 all about, Todd?
So Culture 668, it's a service that works with people who are, companies who are going to China, who are looking to manufacture, find manufacturers, do cross-cultural interactions, cultural, business. And the 668 in Chinese is Lu Lu Fa or Liu Liu Ba. And Lu Lu Fa is an expression that means all roads lead to riches or success. So.
Very good. Wayne.
Claude, I couldn't resist. There are two things that I need to clarify. One, from an American company standpoint, we want to get to know them as much as possible, which is rightfully so. But at the same time, to suggest that from an American company standpoint, not to tell them everything. Isn't that contradictory from one point?
Okay, could you hold that part of it? And so you want to restate the question and answer?
Okay, so what I understand that you're saying is that I'm saying that they should ask as many questions as they can from the perspective of the company, but that they should not give too much information about themselves, and that is a contradiction.
Yes.
And then we can talk about the story Mao Dun, right? So, no, I don't think it's a contradiction. Maybe I don't understand why you would feel it's a contradiction, because we want to keep what we have more to ourselves as far as who we are, but we want to understand more about the other individual. The more we allow them to understand about us, the more they know about us, then that's not really helping us. So we just need to let them know as much as they need to know, but not give too much, because Americans tend to be very friendly and open, and sometimes in some cultures that's not a good way to be. So we just need to be, and I'm speaking to Americans, I'm not speaking to Chinese, right?
That's why I'm looking at it from an American perspective.
Right, and so from American perspective, Americans like to be an open book, right?
But that's the good repetitions in American business, in the international.
Right,
community.
right. But when we're interacting with certain cultures, we need to also recognize that sometimes we have to adjust, and not because we're interacting with people from a different perspective.
But you expect the other party to share everything with you.
Well, they will also do the same. You know that, you're Chinese.
Yes.
Right.
No, but it's a gift. I mean, forget about American and Chinese and so on, but in a business negotiation, it's more like share, right? I mean, the more you give, the more you return, that kind of thing. My only issue is that if you offer everything and try to gain everything from other people, they will do the same thing with hesitation. That's my only
Okay, so I think his point is you can withhold and maybe it looks suspicious.
Yeah.
That kind of, you're going, so you have to share,
Yes.
but you're just saying, Todd, don't share too much.
Right.
You agree with what he's
Right,
saying, though, right?
right.
You want to share enough that they
Right.
start to understand you and respect you. And
Oh, right.
feel
You
like
don't
you're
want
not
them
hiding.
to notice that you're not, that you're holding back. No,
Okay.
that's just all a part of the whole thing.
The second point is that you ask the American company not, just a minute, not to deal with the agent over there, but yet you ask the American company to hire you as an agent to go over there. But that's kind of contradictory, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. I think it's looking, and I'm not saying to hire me. I'm just saying
No, I mean, you say to
hire
an agent,
somebody
but you kind of
who understands both sides,
Yeah.
right?
You
Who's
want
able
them-
to,
You don't want to deal with an agent over there, but yet you can encourage the American company to hire an agent to go over there as a second option.
right.
Okay, so the question is, what are the better ways to handle it? You want to understand the market yourself, and your question is more around if you hire someone over there, it's potentially.
No, that's not my point. When you deal there, sometimes they have agents. I mean, that's how the market works, right? Sometimes you go through an agent, some company, they go through that. That's fine either way in the international doing business. But at the same time, you say, don't talk to any agent over there, period. At the same time, you encourage the American company to hire an agent to go over there. They I mean, they would say the same thing. I don't want to deal with you as an agent.
Okay, so the question is really, what is the best way to handle it in terms of doing business over there? What would you suggest?
Okay, so one thing that I mentioned is that having somebody who's working for you, who's working for you as a dedicated person, right? Versus going over to the Canton Fair and finding somebody there in the fair, which is usually a university student or somebody who has some English skills that will help you go around and do translating and interpreting for you and help you interacting with the factories and the manufacturers, right? So what I'm saying is that we want to hire somebody who we know is working for us, because when you're hiring somebody who's over there looking for an opportunity, then you may not be getting the quality of translating or cross-cultural skills. And at the same time, there also could very easily be some under the table situations going on between that individual and the people that they are introducing you to.
So does that make sense? Okay. Well, let's cover that after the meeting. But in terms of, I think my understanding of what you said originally was, and this I've seen Americans do this, is that they'll go to, whether it's China or somewhere else, they'll show up and just figure, well, you know, you're talking to me, so you're on my side 100%. Right. And that's not always the case, whether it's China or Michigan. You know, you've got to be careful on doing your due diligence on who's representing you. And you have to understand that. I think that's what you're saying. Yes. Okay.
And that they also have those cross-cultural, the multilingual skills.
Sure. Yep.
So then you know that they understand the culture. Just like you speak English, you speak Chinese, so you've lived over here, so you understand the differences between our cultures, and you're able to help people with that. Those are skills that help you to cross cultures. And a lot of the people who are in China may not have those skills. They maybe learned English in college or something, and so those are important skills to have, as the experience of that cross culture.
So yeah, I think we see that. I mean, we see it with Global Chamber because we see different cities, even within the U.S. You go to Miami or Atlanta, L.A., New York. I'm from New York, right? So, you know, I've seen New Yorkers in Arizona as an example, and it's odd. You know, that they don't fit. It's a square peg in a round hole. They're crazy. You know, unless you've acclimated to this pace and things like that. So I think that's really, you know, kind of a general theme, but I think certainly for Canton, and we'll follow up with you, Wayne, after the conversation. Thank you. Very good question and good perspectives.
If I can just ask, is it more not about not hiring a Chinese agent per se, but not walking into the fair and hiring someone there whose sole job it is, right? So it could very well be somebody who lives in China, has been doing business in China for years, going back and forth. It's more about just not relying on the trade show to provide somebody whose motives may not be.
So the question, if you haven't heard it, is more around, don't just show up at the fair without preparing to have somebody in place. And if you showed up at the fair and found somebody at the Starbucks there, you know, and now they're representing you, that's questionable.
Right.
It's just like any country or anywhere, it's just more compounded there.
Having an introduction, if you know somebody and they introduce you to somebody over in China that they've worked with, they know that they're reputable.
And those of you who are listening anywhere around the world, if you have questions about that and you want to be connected to the right people that you can trust, let us know. Again, info@globalchamber.org. That's what we do. We connect people to people that are trustworthy, and so that's a critical point of business anywhere in the world. Thank you very much, Todd.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Nice job. Is Robert on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me, Doug?
Oh, we can hear you actually perfectly. Absolutely.
All right, perfect, perfect.
You've been
Thank you.
going
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Oh, no worries. You're calling in from Taylor, I think.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so right all the way across the world here in Michigan. And so tell us more about your experience with Canton Fair. It's a good experience.
Oh, it's a terrific experience. I'd like to just, comment on some of the things that Todd said in his presentation. I mean, a lot of his information was very helpful and spot on. I think that, just knowing the culture and kind of knowing what you're getting into prior to, getting on that 16 to 17-hour flight from here to, China is something that's very important. I've actually been traveling to China since about 1999. And I've had, great success in purchasing directly from a number of factories that have basically exhibited at the Canton Fair. probably in excess of $100 million over the past 17 to 18 years. Items from automotive portfolio manuals that hold the glove box portfolio to several different OEM parts that we basically developed from scratch, to different surprise and delights where if you bought an automotive vehicle, you received something in the mail for purchasing it, whether it be a set of director chairs that we did for Ford Motor Company, or a set of 2 Yeti-style coffee mugs, or something of that nature, to basic, normal promotional projects, whether it's plush or Energizer or different items that we've done over the years. A number of the factories that we work with have been on display at the Canton Fair, and what I've noticed that's been the most important thing over the years at the Canton Fair is the Canton, Fair, basically the people that developed the Canton Fair and the commerce over in China have made it much more easy for international travel over there. I would say over the past 10 years, just the infrastructure of being able to get to the fair and being able to coordinate yourself and get through the fair has been unbelievable. Just the new location, the new facility, the new exhibition center is much more organized. It's on 2 floors as opposed to probably 8 or 10 floors, which was the last one was on, in 3 or 4 different halls. And just the organization of it, it's much more manageable than it was in the past.
Very good.
So I don't know if there were questions, Doug. I'm usually pretty good about, answering questions. I'd rather than me just talk for 10 minutes, if people had questions in regards to my experience over there, I'd have no problem answering questions, and that might be the best way if anyone has any questions.
Okay. I don't see any questions coming in. Are there any questions for Robert here? You said you've been going over for over 20 years. What was your first trip?
My first trip was in 1998 was my first trip. I was, I was 28 years old, and I went over there as the very young American, and fortunately we were part of the International Trade Group, which was set up with 9 or 10 different countries from around the country, and there were a lot of experienced importers at the time that I kind of, went underneath their wing, probably different people from Italy and also from France and from Belgium that are all great sourcing individuals, and I was able to walk the show with them and meet a lot of the factory owners that they've worked with and sourced products with for several years. And I was, very fortunate with the people that I was able to tour and visit the Canton Fair with.
Okay. How would you comment on a couple of the things that Todd talked about, which was, visiting the factory and talking to management, having dinner with them and making the connection there? And then what about representation and, how to basically, either bring someone with you or have someone over there that you know and trust or is kind of on your dime?
I would agree completely with that in regards to, meeting the factory owner and talking to the factory owner and dealing with the factory owner. I think it's just like doing business in the United States where people buy from people that they like and people that they can associate with. And if you have even though you might speak a different language, most factory owners, I think, have, very good, they say that they can't speak English very well, but they can speak English very well. Most of the factory owners, I would say, are very fluent in English, a lot more fluent in English than most Americans are in Cantonese or Chinese. But I think that if you go out to dinner with someone and you meet the person and you find out if you feel that the person is trustworthy, you visit the factory, you see what's happening in the factory, you make sure that they have potable water, you make sure that their dormitories are safe and clean and have, the proper fire escapes, and you check a few of the different, human resource cards or basically applications that people have to make sure that all of the people that are working there are compliant. Obviously you can't do that with every single person at the factory, but you take random people and you grab a badge when you're walking through the factory and you ask to see the information for a particular individual. And most good factories will have that on file. In regards to, the relationships, I've had, numerous factory owners that I still speak with till today that I haven't worked with in probably 5 or 10 years. I think that the Chinese culture is one of, they like the partnership and they like long-term partnerships. They don't want the one nice order and done. They want something that it's going to last for years and build over time. And they look at every relationship as an opportunity for growth.
Have you ever had to fire someone, basically, that you've worked with?
We've had to fire factories in the past where we've had issues. We work with a lot of different independent testing agencies like Buena Veritas and SECO, Asian Inspection, and SGS, and a number of the different agencies that do a lot of our testing for us. A lot of times we'll have independent companies go in and perform audits on the factories before we even step foot in their factory. So if I'm working on a large project for something that I don't need until maybe January or February, I'll have a factory audit take place now, and then I'll do a surprise audit on the factory when I'm there in October, and then we might place the order at the same time. Well, when I get there in October, I'll already have the sample, I'll already have the proof, and I'll kind of show up at the factory, and I'll work with the factory owners and basically possibly place the order while I'm over in October, so that way the goods deliver by the end of the year to hit my event date of January.
So one question every Chinese company I meet in China asks me about tariffs, and if we have any suggestions for them to go through this period of time here. How would you answer that?
So what we're doing, Doug, is actually we're doing it on both sides. So we're trying to make the factories aware of it, and at the same time, when I'm quoting something now that's going to be delivered after September 1st, because I think one of the first round of tariffs is supposed to go into effect after September 1st, we're actually putting on our quotes that we're sending out to a lot of our clients that, Chamberlain Marketing Group is, the quote that has been provided by Chamberlain Marketing Group dated, August 14th, is set based on the current and approved duties and taxes and tariffs that are placed upon the goods we import. If something happens that is out of Chamberlain Marketing Group's control, that the recipient would be responsible for paying those additional duties and tariffs.
Wow. Okay. And these are at the 25% level, I think. Is that?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, some are at 10%, some are at 25%. We just did about 150,000 piece hat order for one of our customers, and hats are one of the items in compliance. And what I basically did is I called the buyer up and I said, hey Jordan, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's almost a $200,000 hat order. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with your company. However, I just want to make you aware of this. Before I send you an email that accepting your terms and conditions, I want to make you aware that I'm accepting the terms and conditions, with one difference, and that is if the tariffs change and I have no control over what Donald Trump basically implements, that your company is going to be held responsible for that, because whether it's myself or any other importer you're dealing with, we're all going to be held responsible for the same new tariffs, and it'll be something that's across the board. So if you want your hats for a Black Friday promotion, then this is something that you're going to have to abide by.
Gotcha. Thank you, Abdelhak, for the question, and I think that brings us to the end. We've got, thank you very much, Robert, for taking the time to speak today. Really appreciate it. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you, we know how to reach you.
Yep, they can reach out to me anytime. I'd be happy to help, and if anyone's looking for anyone to help them out with their promotional items, I'd love to get a phone call.
Awesome. Very good. We know where to go to. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
We now come to our last speaker, last but not least. Meredith Wilson works out of our Global Chamber Dallas area. She happens to have family and enjoys the summers of Michigan versus Dallas. So we're very fortunate that we have her today. One of the things I want to preface what she's going to be talking about is risk. There's risk in any business venture, right? And so we don't want to scare anyone off to China. That's not the intent of talking about risk here. It's more around just going in with your eyes open. And Meredith, and you could tell from Todd, both have a lot of experience, and Robert, all have a lot of experience with doing business in China, and they've got a lot that they can add and contribute. So Meredith, come on up. Look forward to hearing from you. They're applauding before you start.
Yeah, I like it. We'll see if they're still applauding by the time I finish. When Doug asked me to speak here, my area of expertise really is around the risk piece, but it's risk associated with business. And so we are not the type of company that would ever go to a business and say, you should not work here, except in the case where there's sanctions or something like that, where you really shouldn't work there. But in general, Our job is to help companies figure out how to go into business, whether it be China or Myanmar or wherever, in a way that is sustainable, ethical, and mitigates as much risk as possible, creating more opportunity for the company to be there and to do well there. So when Doug asked me to talk about this, I said, "Are you sure you want me to talk? Because we're trying to get people to go to China, right?" And he said, "Yes, absolutely." So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of the some of the positive things that we've seen with doing business in China, and then some of the some of the kind of big picture risks. So the trade question was an excellent question because that's a great segue into a little bit of what I'm going to talk about right now. Caesar, can you go to the next slide? I'm not used to being not able to drive myself here. So China is still and will continue to be one of the largest consumer markets in the world. Everybody wants to do business there. You have a growing middle class. You have a lot of really good reasons to go work in China. And one of the other really interesting things that's happening right now is that China's role in the world is changing very, very rapidly. If you look at China and the Belt and Road Project and all of these new initiatives that China's taking, regardless of where you stand on global security issues, you cannot deny that China, their influence around the world is increasing. And so it's an exciting thing to be part of, to look at how that growth is going to affect the multinational business climate and in doing business around the world. As China's role grows, its influence on other countries will also grow. And as you're looking at, projects even outside of the Canton Fair, outside of just manufacturing in China, there will be other opportunities that go along with China's growth and building partnerships with Chinese companies and things like that. So there's some really interesting things going on to be excited about right now. Next slide, please. So one of the things I took a look at, because I always think chambers of commerce give us a good barometer of kind of what's going on in different countries. So the U.S.-China Chamber out of China does an annual survey every year of U.S. businesses, looking at what are the good things that are going on here, what's happening with your business, and where do you think things are going. So this one was done in early 2018 or late 2017. And at the time, and this was before the tariff stuff really heated up, but at the time, the impression was that relations between the two countries were going to improve, not deteriorate. And I am still optimistic that things will get better, and I suspect that what will happen is they'll get better rapidly. They'll go from this kind of detente that we have right now to something will give, and when that something gives, we'll start to see some of this stuff fall away. That's my hope. But a lot of businesses that are working in China already feel like things are going to get better. So I'm optimistic about that. Next slide, please. So in spite of some of the risks, and the risks are what we hear about in the news, right? We hear about the trade war, we hear about the South China Sea, we hear about the IP issues. Those are the things we hear about all of the time in the news. So I really wanted to highlight some of the other things going on here. And if you look at, again, this is from the chamber, what you see here is almost across the board, with the exception of one area, which is services like consulting, like what I do. You're seeing almost across the board growth for companies that are working in China right now. And so that's everything from consumer products to industrial to technology and R&D. You're seeing that companies are doing better, making more money in China right now. So that's a good thing. Next slide, please. That little thing there is kind of ruining my 2017, isn't it? How does China rank in your company's near-term global investment strategy? So again, we're seeing priority-wise, it remains a big priority. We saw a decline in 2011, but we've since started to see this tick up again. So, oh, it's okay. It's not that big a deal.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, now we lost it. It's just up there at the top, yeah. If you click on it, I bet you that opens it up.
I think I messed it up. Sorry.
No, it's just go here and click this and see if
So
it'll
you
open.
guys can see it. It's only here where there's a problem.
Oops. Okay. Can you just click right there and see that?
There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's much better.
Okay, perfect. So, so all of these are good things, and all of these things tell me that global companies that have a lot of experience in China, still feel pretty good about doing business there. So before we jump into the risks, I just wanted to kind of give you that perspective that despite whatever you're seeing in the headlines, there's a lot of good things happening still between U.S. business and Chinese business. Next slide, please. These are the two big risks that I see right now for companies that are working in China, thinking about working in China, or have already worked in China. The trade war right now is a really big deal, and I was glad that somebody asked that question because it affects everybody, and I'll get into a little bit more on that in a second. And then the other big one is threats to intellectual property. A lot of these things are being driven at the government level, both in the U.S. and in China. We have a very intense competition going on between the Chinese and the U.S. government right now in terms of technological advancement. Who's going to develop the first, fully autonomous cars? Who's going to develop the biggest and most effective 5G network? The 5G network thing is huge with the current government. All of those bits and pieces of competition, though, boil down and filter down to companies that are working in both countries right now in these sectors. Next slide, please. So because we are in Detroit, I figured I'd just kind of talk around the automotive stuff specifically when it comes to trade, because as we're thinking about this trade fair and we're thinking about what's going on right now with trade, there's a preponderance of impacts for the automotive industry, probably more so than any other industry that I can see, because it's compounded by several different sets of tariffs and issues that are going on around technology and that type of thing. Next slide, please. So the first thing I wanted to show you on this is, of course, if you haven't seen a slide that looks like this, what we're looking at is the U.S.-China trade imbalance. This is what is, for better or worse, driving our the U.S. administration's mentality around trade and trade tariffs is a picture like this. So what you have here is in 2001, which is where that gray line is, China joined the WTO. What we saw from there is that the U.S. trade deficit with China widened substantially, right? So on the blue line there is China, and that is the amount of trade going on with China and the U.S. And then what you see below, the red, is the U.S. So now we have about the U.S. does about 160 billion in exports to China every year, to China's 505 billion to the U.S. So that's what you're looking at right there. It's a very stark picture. Now, we can get into, but I won't get too deep into whether trade tariffs really matter, or whether trade balances really matter or not, because when you look at a population of 1 billion people versus 330 million, you're going to see a difference. When you look at export markets, all of that kind of stuff, does it matter? Don't know, but that is what is driving a lot of the administration's point of view on this stuff. So some of the big impacts that we see for the automotive industry, first thing is, of course, the steel tariffs. Cars are made out of steel. This is important. This is a raw material. So your supply costs are going up. China has levied a retaliatory tariff on cars exported from the U.S. to China of 40%. So we've already seen BMW, whose largest production plant is in South Carolina, moving the production of certain types of cars that are generally exported to China over to China, because a 40% tariff on a BMW in China is almost not sustainable. I mean, you can't really, you're selling the car for almost, 1.5 of what you would normally sell it for. So we're seeing companies move because of that. The 301 tariffs, and this is where we get into the 301 tariffs, were the tariffs that that the U.S. government levied on China July 6th of this year. There was the 301s, and then China's retaliation for that. Those are the national security tariffs that have been added as a punitive measure for what the U.S. Believes to be unfair business trade practices. So companies that go over there and have to hand over their IP or localize their data there, restrictive security policies that make it harder for companies to protect their IP, which the U.S. government believes has led to sort of a bleeding out of U.S. intellectual property. So those tariffs were designed to basically to punish the Chinese government for some of these practices. A lot of those tariffs in that list are automotive parts. So that has a another dampening effect and another, it's another cost you're levying on top of what you're already making. The next round of tariffs, we've done 34 billion. The next round is 16 billion. After that, there's another list for 200 billion. That's kind of like the nuclear option. That round includes a whole bunch more automotive parts, particularly around electric cars, autonomous cars, things like that. And again, this is partially an economic thing, but a lot of it is this technology race that the U.S. sees itself in with China. And then the potential for additional national security-driven tariffs. So you've heard the additional 25% tariff that they're talking about putting on automotive imports to the U.S. As a national security issue. So they've been investigating around trade tariffs on countries like Germany, Japan, big automotive exporters. The idea is to strengthen the U.S. automotive industry, but of course every time you levy a tariff you get a retaliatory tariff, so it doesn't necessarily end up working out that way. So there's a lot of things going on right now in the automotive sector that are costing these companies a lot of money. One of the things that we're starting to see is supply chain shifts. So when we start looking at China right now, one of the risks of doing business over there is that we're starting to see Chinese companies shifting to non-U.S. suppliers. So, for example, I was just looking at something we were writing up today on soybeans. So Brazil suddenly has a huge demand for soybeans. Why? Because we've levied all these tariffs on U.S. soy products, right? It's the same thing will happen with automotive. There will be a shift towards countries where there are not so many tariffs. So this is why we really, really hope this is going to go away sooner rather than later. The big problem for the trade tariff piece right now, particularly if you're a small company like mine, is we can't adapt to this the way big companies can. So if you're a small company and you're going over to China and you're doing, you're wanting to do business with China, importing, exporting, that kind of thing, or say you already had your supply chains set up through China, all of this, you don't really have the ability necessarily to go over and start doing production there versus here just like that, right? You don't have the ability to switch as quickly. So it is a bigger issue, I think, for small companies in some ways than it is for these big companies. I think it kind of speaks to a conversation we were just having a few minutes ago. I think one of the less tangible issues around the trade issues right now is that it's creating a lot of distrust between the Chinese and the Americans at a business level. You have to protect your IP, you have to do this, you have to do that. We're getting a lot of sort of economic espionage talks and things like that, and it's chafing the trust between U.S. and Chinese businesses. And I think that's really a shame, because I think writ large, for the most part, most people just want to do business, and I think want to see each other be successful, make money. But I think one of the risks and one of the impacts of the kind of larger global picture is that we are starting to see more distrust between Chinese and American businesses. Over the long term, could this result in a more favorable business environment? It is possible that the pressure that the U.S. government is levying on China right now leads to some positive reforms in the Chinese business sector, and possibly some positive reforms over here. One thing in particular that we've already seen is that the Chinese government has created an agency to look at issues around IP theft and counterfeiting, which is one of the big complaints that U.S. businesses have with working in China. And so they're actually building an agency dedicated to rooting out counterfeits and IP theft related issues. So we could start to see more of that, because what I see China doing right now is trying to adapt around certain laws, certain regulations that could make it a more favorable business environment for other countries, and eventually, when all of this dies down, hopefully for ours as well. And just could force an overall change in behavior between the two countries. So that's what we, that's kind of what we hope for on the, hopefully in the short to medium term, but maybe overall in the long term. Next slide, please. So, so this is also from that survey, and what I want you to look at is these are the, what businesses there see as primary barriers to increasing innovation, increasing investment in China right now. Lack of sufficient IP protection is right there at the top. Increased restriction on data security related policies. So you'll have seen that U.S. companies that do business in China now have to have a data center there. So that adds a lot of costs. So if you're doing e-commerce or mobile phones, like Apple just built a they had a data center in China, but they handed it over to the Chinese government a few weeks ago as part of the new laws. So those kinds of policies are the things that I think U.S. businesses find the most difficult in terms of working with China. Increased restrictions on localization policies. A lot of these are around IP protection. There's very little in terms of physical security risks, things like terrorism, things like that are not a big deal. It's these kinds of things that really create the risks and barriers for companies that work in China. Next slide. So, so we already kind of talked about this, so just a few more quick comments on this. Threats to intellectual property are not exclusive to China, but are considered particularly high here. Trade shows around the world, it doesn't matter where you do them. I was at we have a annual security trade show here in the US that we do an exhibit at, and you get interviewed by every single person that comes over to your booth. And it's very, very detailed questions about, where do you get your data, and how do you do this, and how do you do that? And you do, and this is where we talk about giving away a little bit, but not giving away too much. And this really is not about China specifically. There's a lot of, I used to work in government intelligence. There's a lot of third country, what the US government calls third country nationals. People from all over the world come to these trade shows to gather information about all kinds of things. So that is no different at the Canton Fair than it is at a fair here in the US. So keeping an eye on and understanding who you're talking to at a trade show, regardless of where it's at, is really, really important, because you may be talking to a potential customer or you may be talking to a competitor. The big tech shows here in the US, I know there was a guy recently, a connection of mine, who was at a tech trade show, and it was another security related fair, who went up to this booth, told him what company it was from, and the guy at the booth proceeded to tell him about this product that he had basically duplicated all of their IP on, and how he was doing it, and how he was, so it wasn't very bright, because the guy had on his company badge and everything. But so there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on, regardless of what kind of, where you're doing your trade show. So those are just things that always to keep in the back of mind, regardless of whether you're American or Chinese or wherever you're from. The race for technological dominance. Oops, can you go back for just a second, Caesar? I promise I'm almost finished. We talked about that already, but this does make IP theft a bigger risk between the US and China right now. We've already talked about that, and we've already talked about that. Okay, Caesar, you can go to the next slide. So mitigations. Exercise caution, discussing your product, your innovation. Take only what is absolutely necessary with you. So in terms of electronic devices, things like that, particularly at trade shows, there's so much spyware out there now where people can pull information off of your phone, sometimes when it's not even on. Sometimes it makes sense to take a phone that doesn't have a lot of information stored on it. Limit access to company servers. While in China, same thing. I have Apple products. Everything's connected, right? So I can get everything that's on my computer on my phone. That's not a phone I'm going to take with me to China. Or really, a lot of places in the world, I don't take that phone. So take what's necessary, limit access to information. Make sure you fully understand information security laws and protocols while traveling there. China has a very different set of information security laws than we do. It's important to understand what those look like, even if you're just visiting, but especially if you're going to set up a business there, because that may require you to do some things that over here we would not do. So, talking to people who have lived there, who have done business there, to other companies that are still in business there, those are all really important things to do so that you can go into this and make it profitable, but also avoid some of those bigger risks that, that may exist. And I believe is that it? Yeah, last slide. So any questions, comments? I knew that it was going to come from there.
Can you walk up so that people can hear you? Oh, sure. So there's a question from Wayne, and just so that we don't have us translating your question.
Sure.
Can you stand near the microphone?
Yeah, sure. Just curious on the automotive levies that the U.S. government
It's
put in
talking
on
about,
do you, in your opinion or in your professional opinion, do you think that's come from the big three OEM here, or strictly come from the government itself?
Oh, no, the companies here don't want that at all. If you look, I think last week or the week before, GM, several other of the big companies here put out an open letter to the government and said, this is not a good idea. Because as you probably know, the U.S. car makers, as well as the Japanese car makers, Chinese, they make parts of their cars here and parts of their cars in other places. So everybody ends up with the tariff levied, whether they're a U.S. company or not. It's the same thing that's going on with NAFTA right now, right? If you're making half of your car in Mexico and we get rid of the free trade piece, it's going to cost U.S. companies that are making those cars there for cheaper, more money to get their cars back into the U.S. So no, I don't think that it is driven by the auto industry. I think the auto industry wants all of this to go away. That's my impression. And, GM in particular has been interesting because their CEO is very good at kind of playing the cards close to the vest, being very apolitical. And GM finally came out and said, look, this is not a good idea. So no, I think it's really being driven by the perspective of a few people in the U.S. government who have a very hawkish view of trade. But I don't think it's the general global consensus. Any other questions? That was just
Well, the slides and contact information, yes.
Yes.
So just kind of as we probably need to wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Meredith, for great job and great presentation. And she was very concerned about, having the conversation about risk being, a downplaying of the opportunities. And hopefully, I think you did a great job with understanding the balance of that. Yeah, it is a risky world, and some of the things that are happening right now are very unusual, and hopefully I'm with sharing of the view that things will get better, although they might get worse before they get better. We'll have to see. But ultimately, it just doesn't make sense. And so longer term, it's better to stay involved with the world and with global business. And that's why we started Global Chamber. My own belief being from a big company, and then over the last 10 years working with smaller companies, has been that smaller companies are more challenged with resources, but big companies have their series of issues as well. And so whether it's them, the big companies, or smaller companies, there needs to be, and as we grow out, we find more and more opportunities to help companies reach new markets. And so we view global business as a positive, as an inevitable. It's something that everybody should do. I think everybody here in this room, and certainly I know in my own career, starting with a multinational 30 years ago, you know, it was a challenge to get the DuPont company, or talking to GM at the time, get GM to really think about, you know, being more competitive in other parts of the world. That's changed. The multinationals are there. The smaller companies want to be there. It's harder for them to be there. And so Global Chamber is there for them so that they can reach out to new markets and talk to people. So today's conversation really was intended to be, you know, think about Canton Fair. Our next, and we do events continuously, at least one a week, and we actually have another event starting in 30 minutes about doing business in Mexico. And so Global Chamber Guanajuato, I believe they're in León today, will be hosting a group there, and also from around the world, talking about what are some of the risks and opportunities in Mexico. And so I encourage you to look for that on our website, globalchamber.org. There's both local and global events like the one today, and looking forward to working with all of you around the world on a continuous basis. Thank you very much for taking the time. Thanks to all our speakers. Meredith, Todd, Kevin is sound asleep at this point over in Guangzhou, I think. So that's all a good. Robert Ross, who's also might still be listening. Thank you from across town. Want to also thank the Detroit Chinese Business Association for their collaboration on this event, and they've got representation in the room. So I encourage everyone here in this room to meet up with Milan in the back and their president Brian Gao. To talk more about some of the things that they're doing. Collaboration is a key part of Global Chamber all around the world, and we love working with binational chambers and other organizations. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I see that I think these are messages from Global Chamber. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And if you do typically for events like this, we do post them after. Be available. So if you're interested in listening again, or certainly from a standpoint, if you've already listened, you know, connecting up with some of the speakers, we'll be happy to make the connections. Thank you, everybody.